In this video, we're going to look at how activities work. And as an example, we're going to start with our first activity, which is our main screen. And we're going to create a button and link it to a second screen, which is also called an activity. So in Android, the equivalent of a new screen in here, or a view, is called an activity. So what we're going to do is have one activity connect and display the other one through the use of clicking a button. So I'm going to start by opening up a new project in Android. So I'm just going to do a new Android project, test activities. And I'll use the default location, click next. And I'm just going to go with a low target Android 1.5. And next. And this is our application name. So this is what the user actually sees on the screen. I'll have my package name and create an activity. Now the activity is our screen, so I'm just going to call it test activities and click finish. So from here we have seen that in our layout folder we have a main XML file, and by double clicking on that you can see what our activity screen looks like. So right now we just have a little bit of text here. If I open up our source and go to our Java file, so our test activities Java file, this is the Java code that is used to create and run the application. And you can see from this that we have some code in here that test activities, which is our view or our activity, is extended from the activity class. So this is the file that actually extends the activity class, and it represents our initial main activity. So the way this is set up is that when our app loads, it's going to load the test activities activity. And you can see from down here we have our onCreate method, and it's a super onCreate, and we'll get into what this is in another lecture. But this sets the content view, and it goes to the R Java file, finds the layout with the name of main. So this main references our main XML file that displays our view or our activity. Now if you want to see where this R class comes from, it's automatically generated. So you can see in this gen folder, and if I expand this down, you can see the R Java file. And when I open it up, it says auto-generated file, do not modify. So this will automatically keep track of different elements within your app. And you can see here that main has been given a place in memory and an identifier. So it recognizes once something is in this R Java file, we're able to incorporate that into other parts of our app. And so you can see here, just like we have other things, the app name and the hello string from when it was automatically created. This is the icon launcher, the default icon for the app. So the R Java file automatically generates and keeps track of these things, and so we don't modify this. Even if you were to come in here, if I close this and deleted it, sometimes maybe need refreshing your files if something doesn't get picked back up again. I can go in here and I can delete this, and it's going to say, are you sure? And I'll say yes, and it's going to say our Java was removed, and now it's recreating it again. So it automatically recreated it and tracked the information that was in there. So we're using this R file, this r.java file, to say that the layout that we're using to display on our activity is the main layout. So if we want to create another activity, we have this, and what we're going to do is change some text on here and add a button so that when we click on it, it will open up a separate activity. So first of all, I'm just going to delete the text that's here, and I'm going to pull in Another text view. Let's center it, and I'm going to just change the text on this. So instead of large text, we should use text strings for this, but that'll be covered in a different demonstration. So let's say first view. And we'll add a button that we're going to click on. And I'll also center that. And let's change the text on the button to say second view. We're going to be referencing this button in our code, so I'm going to come up here and give it a different ID. I'm going to say go_btn. So that means from this point forward, when I want to reference this button in my code, I can use go_button and it will know that this is the button that I am referring to. Okay, so I'm going to save my main XML file. Whenever you've made changes like this, you need to make sure that you save them, because what happens is when that is saved, let me come back in here to my R-Java file. When it's saved, then it adds the information. So you could see here it added the text view that I had in with our first view text, and it added the go button information in here as well. So you have to save this in order for this file to be updated. If we didn't save it, then we wouldn't be able to reference it without some errors in our Java code. Okay, so the first view is set up, and now we need to create a second activity, another activity. So for our activity, we have an XML file, which is one for our view, and we need also another Java file that will handle the activity for the second view. And when I say view, I'm referring to it in general terms, but it's really another screen is an entirely new activity. So we need to create a new XML file and another Java file for that activity. So we're going to need another Java file similar to this one that's going to extend the activity class. And the activity class lets us have access to a lot of things that are already predefined and set up for us. So this makes dealing with activities a lot faster and more efficient. So to create a new activity or a new Java file, I'm just going to right-click over my source folder, and I'm going to choose New Class. And we can leave the source folder and package all the same. And I'm going to call this Second. And we can leave it as public, but our superclass needs to be extended from the activity class. So I'm going to choose Browse, and I'm just going to type in activity. And you can see it start to narrow down the choices. So we want the activity from the Android application package. So I'm going to choose that and OK. And then the rest of these can be left for their defaults. And I'm going to click Finish. So now you can see it created a second .java file. And it is extending, this is our class name, and it's extending from the activity superclass. Now in addition to this, we also have to have an XML file for our layout. But before we get into that, let's set up this file so that it's ready to go. So I'm going to start to type in here the onCreate method. And if I hit the Control and the space bar, as you start to type in a method, it will pop up with some suggestions. And the first one is the one that we're going to use, and you can see it's to override the method in activity. So I'm going to click on that, and it puts in the rest of the code, some auto-generated method stub. And what this will do is override the onCreate method so that we can set up which user interface we want to put into this activity. So in other words, which activity or which layout XML file we want to display when this activity loads. So we don't have that one created yet, so we will come back to this after we create our XML layout file. So in the meantime, I want to make sure I save my second Java file, and we're going to create a new layout file for our second activity screen. So I'm going to go up here to this third button in our Android group buttons, and this, you can see, is the wizard to create a new Android XML file. So I'm going to click here, and it says the resource type, so this does happen to be a layout file that we're going to create. The file is called second.xml. Now you need to be careful when you're naming your file. You can't have any capital letters here. Don't use any spaces in your file name or any other symbols. So really just keep it to alphabetical letters, all lowercase. And we can choose the layout style that we want to use, and the default is linear, so I'm just going to leave it in linear. We have other demonstrations to show you how to use some of the other types of views or the other layout options. So we'll just stick with linear. And I'm going to click Next. Now this gives us other qualifiers which we can get to later on, but these let us be specific about some particular kinds of things that we would find in this layout. For example, if I wanted to set this layout to be for a certain screen height or width or orientation, or if it's just going to be a screen that detects night mode, we could choose one of these identifiers. But for now, I'm just going to continue on and click Finish. And now we have our second XML file, which is blank. And I'm going to just grab some text and put it onto the screen here. We will change the text on here so that it will say second screen, and also center it out here on the screen. So now I'm going to save my file. So what we're aiming for is when our main XML activity screen loads, we're going to be able to click Second View. And when we click Second View, we want it to load this second XML file. And that will be handled, the underneath part will be handled by our initial test activities Java file. We're going to put some code in here as to how to handle the button, and when the button is clicked, that it should load our second activity. So we have some more work to do in here in order to get this all to work. Okay, so in our test activities Java file, it's loading our main layout, and now we're going to add some code in here to listen for when the button is clicked, and then tell it what to do when that button is clicked. First of all, we'll say button, and we're going to make up a variable name, and I'm just going to say my button is equal to button. Now you can see here it's starting to underline in red, and if I hover over this, you can see one of the fixes is import button. And what we want to do is import this, and it's going to add it up here to our imports. Right, in order to work with the button widget, we have to import in that information so that all of the things that have to do with the button widget will be available to us in our app. Now we're going to find the button, like we can have several on our screen. So we need to tell it specifically which button we are going to call my button, and then use the code on it. So I'm going to say find view by ID, and we're going to make a reference to that R Java file. So we're going to say R ID, and as you can see, as I type in, now it's picking up some of the information out of that R Java file that I can access. I have a text view, and then there's class, but the Go button, since I named my button and I called it Go button, it's been added to the R Java file. So now I can click on this and say, yes, that's the button that I want to attach to my button. And then I'll put in a semicolon, and now you can see it's changed a little bit, the color, and it's italicized. So that's one way of telling that it has recognized something that is in the R Java file. It recognizes the ID. So whenever you see this R like this, you can see that it's referring to this R Java file. So we're saying, okay, this is the button, the Go button, we're assigning it to my button. So what are we going to do with this button? We are going to assign an on-click listener to listen for when it has been clicked and then do something when it has, and in this case, to start the new activity. So we have my button. We'll do set on-click listener, and then I can say new, and we'll start typing on-click, and as I do, I'll be able to press the Control and Space key and come up with an anonymous inner type. In other words, you can see here interface definition for a callback to be invoked when a view is clicked. So in other words, this is going to call another little function inside here to run when the button is clicked. So I'm going to select this option, and you can see that it populates an auto-generated method stub, similar to how it did when we did the second Java file. Only this time it is for the on-click, and when the view that we're referring to is clicked, in this case the button. The different elements that you include on your graphical layout or your interface, each of these elements are actually called views. So I should probably change that to activity to be even more clear about what we're talking about. So instead of second view, let's say second activity. And this should also be first activity. So we're on the first activity, and these elements that are on our interface are called views. So when we're referring to that in our code, make sure this is saved. So when we're referring to that in our code, this view, right, my button is a view. So if that button is clicked, then this is what it's going to work with when this view is clicked. Now I'm also getting some errors popping up here. We need to import the on-click listener. So just like we imported the widget for the button, we need to import the on-click listener. And now all of our errors go away. Except for this one, which that closes it, so we probably need a semicolon there. Okay, so what this actually boils down to again is we're defining our button. We're saying the Go button that we created in our user interface is being assigned to my button. My button is getting set with an on-click listener so that it will listen for when that button is clicked. So we have, you can see that we have a comment here to show that this was auto-generated. You can leave that in if you decide to. If you don't want to, you can always take it out. Inside the curly braces here for our on-click is what we want to have happen when the button is clicked. So we're getting to all this, and now we can finally say what we wanted to do is start activity. We're using a new intent. And intents we're going to talk in more detail in another demonstration about what they are. So for right now, know that you need to say that we have an intent. We're using this for is to open up a new activity. So we're going to say from this activity, which is test activities dot this, in other words, this particular activity, it should load the second class. And then we have some underlines here, so we need to import the intent. And again, it's going to add it up here into our import statements. Okay, this it just looks like I spelled it wrong, so I'm just making sure I spelled it the same way in both places. And that seems to have taken care of that issue. So let me save this. So our button is listening for when it's clicked. When it's clicked, it's going to invoke this inner anonymous method, listening for the click, and when that occurs, it's going to start the activity, create a new intent to say go from this activity to our second class, which is in the second.java file. So let's make sure everything is saved, and I'm going to test this and let's see what it looks like in the emulator. Okay, in my emulator, I have my first activity and my link to go to my second activity. So when I click my button, I get not such a good result coming back. So let's see if we can figure out maybe why this was going on. So back in Eclipse, I have Logcat open. If you don't have Logcat open, you can go into Window and Show View and Logcat, and if it's not displaying right there, you can go into Other and search for Logcat. So this gives me some error messages here. Fatal exception main, unable to find explicit activity. So I'm just going to the first message that I find here that is in red. Red is usually like why it's failing. So I have the information popping up, unable to find explicit activity. Second, have you declared this activity in your Android manifest? Well, no, we haven't done that. So that's probably a good reason, a good place to start with. If you remember the manifest file, all your activities, like we're trying to load this second activity, but we haven't declared it in our manifest file. So I'm going to open the manifest file, and I'm going to go to the application tab, and you can see that this is where we add the activities. Now you can do this in the XML code. We can also do this in the different screens that we have here. So test activities is the one that's loaded by default. So let's add an activity, and we'll browse for it. And here's our second activity, so I'm going to make sure that's selected and choose OK. And now there's other things to fill in here, but we're just going to make sure that our activity is registered here. So I'm going to save my manifest file, and let's try running this again. Okay, so it is showing. Let's try clicking the button. Now, no error message this time, but it's not showing us the second screen that said second screen or second activity. So there's still something that's not quite connected right. So we'll go back in. Now let's look at our view. We have our second XML view, second screen. Again, I'm going to change that text just so that it says second activity so that we can be specific, although that's not going to make it show up. So this looks okay. Save that. The second Java file though. Second Java file, we have our class here and it's extending activity. But if you remember from the main, our test activities Java, right, we had a line in here that was set content view, and it was getting to the R Java file, getting the layout file, and we were specifying main. So this is what's actually loading the main XML file into the activity. So we need to do that in our second Java file. So we'll go in here and say set content dot, and now it gives us our options whether we have two different layouts available here, main and second. So I'm going to choose second, and it changes color, so I know now that it is recognizing that view. So now I'm going to save my Java file, make sure all my files are saved. We'll go back in and run it. Okay, and we'll click the button. And now this time it does go to the second activity. So that is the fundamentals of creating another activity. We created a Java file, and in the Java file we overrode and put our onCreate in here and set our content view to the second layout XML file that was created. We created a second XML layout file and put some content into it. Once we have the activity created, we had to make sure it was included in our manifest file. And again, I'll go into the XML here and just show you that this was the minimum that was needed for it to recognize the activity. And then in our first activity, we added a button, made sure that it had an ID. And then in our Java code, we were able to say, find the button with that ID, assign it to this variable name for a type of button, add an on-click listener, and this is little anonymous inner event in here when that view, that button is actually a view, when that button is clicked, to start this activity with a new intent, which will load the activity that we specify.